Hello, hello. Just checking audio real quick. I think we are live. Just gonna do a quick audio check on some of my other platforms real quick before we get started. Hope everyone's doing okay. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you are on this, it's sunny over here, so it's a beautiful day. I do think I see a little bit of lag, so 1 second. Let's fix some of these things before we dive in. I think today's session should be pretty interesting. Have something that I want to talk about that keeps on coming up in different conversations. Okay, I think my internet's actually very laggy. 1 second here. Okay, let me just check one more thing. Let me know if folks who are tuned in, if it is a little laggy. I can't really tell. It looks very laggy on my end, so I wonder if we might have to actually redo this. Let me just check on a different platform real quick. Here it is. Here it is. Oh yeah, it's a little laggy. It's a little odd. Okay, well, hopefully this gets resolved at some point. I don't know what is causing the lag on my end. But if you guys all tuned in, let me know if you are seeing the lag as well, because I think this might not be watchable right now. I'm trying to close out some of my tabs in an effort to fix this. Let's see. Close, 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 close. Okay. That looks a little better. Maybe that was what it was. I was logged into my Google Drive that was very laggy. Okay, let me just check one more time before we get started. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead. Let me know if this ends up being unwatchable. But for today's chat, I actually want to share a little bit about some of the comments that I've been getting and even the conversations that I've been having. And the topic revolves around transitioning to health tech. I think I probably get at least 10 messages a day about how to transition into health tech. The questions come from all different places, from different folks. Some are in clinical, some are in tech. And it's very interesting to hear the types of questions that folks have. But the overarching theme is basically, how do I get into health tech? And I think there is a lot of conversation about it in general, within the healthcare industry, about how do we get into health tech. So I want to chat a little bit about it. The first thing I'll mention, though, is the different types of roles, because that's something that comes up quite often. When most people usually ask about transitioning to health tech, the very first thing that I ask back to them is, what role are you looking for? Because health tech is so broad. And there's a couple that usually come up. I think the most popular ones that people usually ask about is like, should I do data science or data engineering or product management or some biomedical informatics or clinical informatician, or software engineer? And each one of those roles has overlap for sure, but there are also many different, in my opinion, ideal pathways to get to each, and it really depends on which role you want. So roles is always one thing to consider, and I usually talk to people about that. It's like, what role do you actually want? And if they're not sure, usually it goes into, well, do you know what these types of roles do on a day-to-day basis? Because data science sounds cool, but maybe you don't like statistics, or you don't like running models and cleaning data all day. Maybe it's not for you, or software engineering. Maybe you don't enjoy troubleshooting and debugging code. I actually don't know as much activities they do, but or maybe writing technical documents, or just doing a lot of things that you may not enjoy. Product managers who may be in meetings all day, and you deal with also marketing and UI UX. Maybe you don't enjoy those kind of things. So I think a big part of it is looking into the activities associated with each role, and then looking at the different requirements and education and skill sets required for each of those roles, determine what you would enjoy the most. I'm gonna do a quick check on the live stream lag. Hopefully it's not still doing that. 1 second. Okay. I think it's still lagging pretty bad. Yeah, if you guys are in the chat, let me know if you notice the lag or anything like that. But I'm gonna keep going in the meantime. So we have roles, we have activities. The next question that typically comes up is like, okay, maybe you want to be a data scientist, or maybe you want to be a product manager, or maybe you want to be an informatician. How do I go about learning those skills? And I think this is something that is not really talked about that much. Is like, how do you go from point A to point B? People talk about getting into health tech, but people don't talk about the skill sets and how do you learn those things. Oh, thanks, Akram, for letting me know that there's no lag. That makes me feel a lot better. Okay, so back to the skill sets. A lot of people, I don't think, really dive deep into what skill sets you should be learning to get to these roles. And I think it's a hard question to answer because, one, there is a lot of overlap. And then two, there's not necessarily a great all-in-one shot to learn the skill sets required for each role. But what I'll try to do is break down this category into a couple of big ones so you can think of it in a more abstract way. The first big category is the most obvious one, which is if you want to transition into health tech, which most people here in my audience are healthcare folks who want to go to a tech role, the very first obvious category is learning more technical skills. And this is your basic coding with R or Python, learning about databases, learning about APIs, servers, networks, just pure technical skills. And for that's a very easy thing to actually find resources for. There's a ton of free resources to learn that. I even put together a free course. It's not really a course, it's more so a repository of resources that I have personally used to upskill my own technical skills. And I'm going to post it in the link here if you guys want to check it out. That's free. Again, these are the resources I've used. Some of the great ones that I really enjoy are the free courses from Stanford and Harvard that goes into the basics of computer science. Very great courses, highly recommend. But there's other things that I think is really important besides pure technical skills, which is like your project management, the methodologies they use in running the day-to-day operations like Agile and sprints, technical writing. So I think that's very easy. There's a lot of free resources like the one I just shared that you can probably find. Another category, and this one should be brief because, again, most of my audience are people who are in healthcare. But I do have some engineers that reach out to me about doing more health tech. And this is a big one for those folks, which is clinical workflows. I think a big category that everyone should know if you're trying to do health tech is you should have some fundamental understanding of clinical workflows. And one way to think about this, or another way of thinking about this, is what actually happens in the hospital setting, what actually happens in a patient and provider interaction, what actually happens when insurances are reimbursing providers for care. All of these things are really important because if you're going to build technology to support healthcare, you should have some fundamental understanding of these things. So I think for folks who are in healthcare already, this is kind of easy because you've probably experienced it in some way, shape, or form. For those who are not, it's a little harder. The technical folks aren't really my audience, so I don't have too much to say here aside from shadowing your clinical colleagues, just learning more about it. You can find a lot of free information here too, but I think it's a lot of the shadowing and seeing it that really helps cement what it really means to provide patient care. But again, I'm not going to focus so much on this because most of my audience is healthcare professionals. The next big piece I would say is biomedical informatics skills. I think this one's a little hard to, I don't know if the best way to say is define, but I think it's a really hard one to really define and find resources for because it's somewhat vague and ambiguous. So biomedical informatics, I like to use the definition from AMIA, and it's like almost an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different areas within informatics. So one example is it includes things at the very biological, cellular, molecular level, where we're talking about like computational biology. How do you take slides of, let's say, pathology or images and run computations on it to extract some type of insight on that level? But it even includes things like clinical informatics, which is more of the clinician and patient level, where you're creating technology for them to assist in patient care. It's a very, very different skill set than computational biology type skill sets, right? Then there, you take it a broader level. There is the public, global, and population health informatics, which is a completely different level again, because now we're not talking about individual patients. We're talking about entire populations or cohorts of patients. That's also a very different skill set. So I think biomedical informatics is really hard to find resources for because you have to further define what do you want to do most. Are you interested in computational methods and analyzing things at that molecular level? Are you interested in workflows that take place between clinicians and providers, primarily in like, let's say, hospital settings? Or are you interested in doing more public population health level? All very different skill sets. And I think when we talk about this, it's figuring out what you want to do and then identifying the skill sets and resources to upskill in that area. And maybe I'll give an example to make it easier. So if you're interested in public global population health informatics, some of the skill sets, in my opinion, that are very important there is learning about public policy. A lot, and maybe this is more specific to public health informatics. A lot of public health informatics involves some type of regulations because you're supporting things like state immunization registries. And being a good public health informatician, I think it's very helpful to understand how some of these regulations are made, how data is collected, what data can be collected, how data is exchanged, all that kind of stuff. But understanding the regulatory side of that and the policy side is very helpful to doing that. Population health informatics, I would say that I guess the regulatory is probably helpful in that aspect as well, because there's a lot of programs like ACOs and regulations that impact how population level care is usually driven. So those kind of skill sets are helpful. So public policy courses, learning more about the healthcare economy, economics, how policy is made, what types of regulations impact healthcare. Those are very core critical skills, and you can find plenty of courses on that, usually health policy, public policy type courses, and even economics. Now, the clinical informatics area is certainly my bread and butter because that's where I spent most of my career. And those skill sets are very unique because one key thing I think is really important is one, knowing your clinical audience, their workflows, what actually happens. So if you are a clinical informatician working in a hospital and building tools for, let's say, the cardiology teams, you should probably understand how cardiologists work through their typical workflows. How do they work up a patient? How do they work their notes? How do they conduct their exams? What are the data elements that they care about? What are the images? All those kind of things are really important in this regard. But also, that's more so unique in this area is the usability and user experience. I think when you're working in a clinical informatics role, having that mindset of thinking about user design and user experience is really, really important. And a big part of this is because of all of the things that you hear about nowadays, even going on for the last 10 years of clinician burnout. Documentation burden is a huge issue in the United States. And I don't remember what year the research was published, but in one of the ones that looked at the documentation burden in the US versus non-US places, it's like 4 times as much. It's pretty significant. So if you're working in this role, I think what's a good skill set to learn is how do you design better software from the user perspective, which is less important on the other sides. Not that it's not important, but it's less important. Another thing here is about human computer interaction, which is somewhat related. It's like, how do you incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors when clinicians are interacting with computers and technology? And the way I was going with this was very similar to like decision support. It's like, how do you design decision support that's useful, not ignored? What is ideal? And that's also a little different. And we think about things like human factors engineering, which I think is really important. Again, it's very related to users design and user experience. So a good skill set here to learn is human factors engineering. The other things is then your very typical, I would say, clinical, maybe it's not as typical. I think it's less common in clinical informatics and more common in your traditional biomedical informaticians that come from more of a computer science background. And what I'm getting at is like standards and terminology. I find that there is a good amount of clinical informaticians that have a good grasp on standards and terminology. And to give a concrete example of this, I'm talking about things like LOINC codes, ICD-10 codes, RX norm codes, NDCs, SNOMED codes, things like that. I do find that there is a good percentage of clinical informaticians that have an understanding of them, but biomedical informaticians that come from more of that technical background have a stronger understanding of them. And so when you're working in this clinical informatics domain, I think having that skill set is also critically important because of many other things. Because you're basically the liaison between clinical and technical, and these standards and terminology is how you can communicate between different systems internally and even externally. So I think that's a really core skill set you can learn. And there's a lot of documentation and resources where you can learn all about the different standards and terminology. Most of them are open source, they're free, and I highly suggest that. So we talked about the population, global public health informatics. This is more so the clinical informatics. And then there's the that computational biology molecular level. This is the piece that I'm currently learning more about, actually in my current class, which I can share if folks are interested. Let me just actually type this in. Should have had this open earlier. So the class I'm taking right now, there is about, I think, 4 or 5 more weeks left. This is the class if you're interested in looking at it. It's computational methods for biomedical image analysis interpretation. I think this is a very interesting area, and I have mixed thoughts about how interested or not interested I am in it. So to give an example is this computational, I think computational biology might be the most broad way of describing this type of area. It's about taking data from healthcare, and I'm going to use the example I'm learning from these classes, like radiology images, CT scans, MRI scans, mammographies, chest x-rays, all these kind of things. And being able to use code like Python to make sense of it. So all of these images are pixels at the end of the day, right? They're all forms of pixels, and there's a ton of metadata associated with it. And you use code to basically analyze the images because they're pixels and extract different features of it. For example, if we're looking at things like tumors have certain shapes. You can measure it in different different types of geometry, right? Some are spiky, some are round, some are irregular shapes. But you can analyze that computationally or mathematically because they're all pixels. And you can make sense of them in some ways. So you can do things like, is this particular image malignant or is it benign? Because you're able to take that image and process it into pixels and then make some prediction about it. It's a very technical and coding heavy area. And one of the things I'm trying to reconcile with myself is whether or not I would consider pursuing more training in this area. It's a very fascinating area. I think it's a very cool area of research. You can apply a lot of the cool tools that people talk about on media, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, CNNs, convolutional neural networks. So a lot of cool things are in this area, which I think is very fascinating. I think the problem that folks may run into, in at least for myself in this area, is that it does get a little further away from some of the direct patient care activities, more or less indirect patient care activities that you may find in a clinical informatics role, and even more, and sometimes even in that public population health level role, because you can really see and feel closer to the patient care in those aspects. So I think that's one of the things I'm reconciling with. But just to quickly summarize all this again, what I'm breaking down here is the skill sets required to learn more of that biomedical informatics skill set. And I'm breaking down biomedical informatics because it's so broad. And when you're thinking about transitioning into health tech, you should really be considering what area, because I assume many people are interested in the biomedical informatics aspect. What area of biomedical informatics are you truly interested in? Do you want to work more at that population public health level, which are different skill sets? And I said public policy being one of them, and economics. Then there's that clinical informatics, which is your standards and terminology, your clinical workflows, your user design experience. Or is it that computational biology level, which I guess I didn't talk about the skill sets as much there, but strong coding skills. You really should know your coding skills. And I think that's one of my struggles. So the easiest one to think about here, especially when it comes to machine learning or deep learning, is Python. A lot of folks use that. And then understanding all the different libraries to use. So focusing on this area is about having strong technical skills. I would also say linear algebra. I think I read somewhere that said typically, if you want to do things within machine learning, especially deep learning, that you should have pretty good understanding of linear algebra. And for the most part, what I'm finding is that's quite true. You don't have to be an expert necessarily, but if you're not, you will struggle like myself. So strong coding skills, linear algebra, and I think coding is one thing, computer science is another. Computer science is a great idea too. How you write your code, how you think like a computer scientist. I think that's really important here too. So 3 areas, hopefully that makes it a bit more clear when it comes to transitioning into health tech. And then the specific skill sets that you can use. to learn those kind of things. And I guess maybe in terms of resources, I can share a little bit more of some of the things that I've been using, which is if you're interested in those technical skills, I have a link that I provided in the chat of things that I'm personally learning that you can go and check out. There's also the, what was it? It actually has computer science courses as well. Hopkins has a fantastic health informatics curriculum for those who are interested in the clinical informatics workflows. There's a lot of great content in there. You can go find it on Coursera. Just search healthcare informatics and you'll find plenty of that. It's less technical focus, much more focused on that hospital and health system level, and pretty over-encompassing, where it talks all about, there's definitely user design experience, there's workflows, there's project management, there's standards and terminology, there's vendor management. There's a lot of different things there. So Hopkins has a great course that you can go check out. They even have, of course, degrees and certificates that you can take on that. So, all right, I think that is most of what I want to share today. If anyone has other questions or thoughts, you're certainly welcome to chime in and ask questions. And I always forget, these things are always more fun when someone joins in and asks questions live. So I forgot to post that actually in the chat, so I'm going to post that now. I'll probably hang out for another 5 or 10 minutes to see if there's anyone that wants to join and even chat online. Otherwise, I think in the last few minutes, I will wrap up by talking about where I'm currently at with my own personal journey. And that is, I did post a blog recently on LinkedIn that covered my thoughts, because in about 5 weeks now, I think, I'm going to be graduating the biomedical informatics program. And I will be transitioning, and this was a big decision, was like, do I continue down the biomedical informatics path, or do I venture off to the computer science path? So I wrote a reflection article, which if you haven't seen, and I think a lot of my YouTube folks probably do not know about this because I only shared it on LinkedIn. Let me actually grab that right now so I can share it with the LinkedIn audience. I mean, not LinkedIn, the YouTube audience. Let's see. I'll post this in the chat. Here we go. Okay. So I wrote an article kind of reflecting on, what I'm thinking about as I wrap up this program. And there's a couple of thoughts. I think most of it is shared in there, but I can give a quick, voiceover of some of it. I think the first thought is that it's a bit daunting, and it's a bit uncertain. And I say daunting because I'm quickly realizing how much math that I need to learn to do some of the more cool stuff that you hear about on media. Again, the hype around AI, machine learning, deep learning, and of course with large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, you really, really need to know your math. Like, you honestly do. And I think that as maybe this is the pharmacist personality in me, pharmacists are typically type A. And actually, maybe I take that one step back. Healthcare people typically do not like black boxes. I really don't like black boxes. And I think it's very difficult to talk about AI when you don't understand the nitty-gritty details. And I think for me personally, I really want to understand the nitty-gritty details so I can more accurately talk about AI and its potential. I think there's a lot of hype and sometimes ill-informed hype, because there's a lack of understanding of how some of these things work. And so that was probably a mini rant. All that to say, it's very daunting because the math is pretty hard. um, and I wonder if continuing down the path is worthwhile, especially down the computer science path, because it will probably get harder. Um, at the same time, it's very interesting because this is how some of these newest and coolest technologies work. The second thing, which I did mention in the article, was how much more abstract and further away it could get from healthcare. I think if I pursued a computer science path, which I'm assuming most others who are in healthcare contemplating would do as well, is to look for opportunities to bring it back to healthcare to some way, shape, or form. And that's probably something I would do. Whatever you're learning, figure out how this can be applied to healthcare. And I think there's a lot of unique opportunities there and interesting ones to explore. Um, the last thing maybe to mention as I contemplate the switch to computer science. So right after I finish this certificate, my next course starts, or rather kicks off the first class in computer science, I think in like June or July, something like that. And that actually will be the first and last class I take for a little while, because for those who are contemplating this switch, especially at this more technical level, which was also, maybe I can talk about that a little bit too, is I think that I severely underestimated the difficulty in terms of how challenging these courses were. Um, I've taken around 20 credits of biomedical informatics courses when I was doing my MPH. And I think the reason why I didn't find it as challenging at the time was because it was less technical. There were certainly some components of it that it was things I'm learning now, but the amount of coding that is present in these current classes is like orders of magnitude more than anything I've ever experienced in any biomedical informatics course I took during my MPH. And it's interesting because it's like a very different world. So all that to say there is, I think that the question is around whether the sacrifice is worth it in that case. It's a lot of work, and you spend a good amount of, if not most or all, of your evenings and weekends and free time pretty much doing this because it's like learning a new language, and it's difficult. So we'll see if I continue down either of these paths, actually, because it just takes a lot of time. Anyways, okay. Well, think I'm gonna wrap it up. Hopefully this was an interesting one. Like I said, a big part of this live stream today really was about the different questions that I get around transitioning to health tech. And one more summary here for those who may have tuned in later is there's a lot of questions about the roles and then the skill sets to learn. So if you're tuning in later, definitely check out the rewatch where I break down some of the categories of skill sets that may be pertinent. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for tuning in and bearing with me during the beginning where there's may have been a little bit more lag. And I will catch you guys next month. And as always, thanks for tuning in and see you next time.